It was a quiet afternoon in the suburban neighborhood, the sun spilling warm light over the rows of small houses. A man calm and steady was walking his dog, a strong and loyal companion with soft brown fur and gentle eyes. The dog trotted happily beside him, tail wagging as it sniffed the grass and occasionally barked at passing squirrels. Neighbors waved from their porches, enjoying the ordinary peace of the day. Everything seemed normal, but for the man, every step carried a weight that no one could see. The man had lived in the neighborhood for a few years, always polite and reserved. People often noticed his calm presence, the way he moved with quiet confidence, but no one knew the life he had led before settling here. He had spent years in some of the most dangerous and secretive situations imaginable, but here, in this simple suburban street, he was just another man walking his dog. As he rounded the corner near the small park, a police car slowly rolled up behind him. The windows were tinted, but the officers inside clearly had him in their sights. The man continued walking, keeping his posture relaxed. He had learned long ago how to stay calm in tense situations, but he could feel the subtle shift in the air, the way the birds stopped chirping for a moment, sensing something was off. The car came to a stop, and two officers stepped out, their hands resting lightly on their belts. They called out to him, asking him to stop. The man obeyed, but his eyes remained calm, assessing the situation without a hint of panic. He could see the tension in the officers' movements, the stiffness in their shoulders, and the nervous glance they shared. Something about them made him instinctively cautious. The dog, sensing the unease, stayed close to his side, low growls escaping its throat. The officers mistook the growl for aggression, their hands tightening on their weapons. The man raised his hand slightly, signaling that he was calm and meant no harm. He spoke softly, explaining that his dog was friendly and that there was no reason for alarm. He kept his voice steady, even as the officers' expressions grew more rigid, but the situation escalated quickly. One of the officers moved too fast, and the dog, startled by sudden movements, barked loudly and jumped forward. In an instant, the officer reacted, pulling the trigger. The sound echoed through the street, and the dog fell silently to the ground. The man's heart sank, but his mind remained sharp. He didn't panic, didn't scream. Instead, he knelt beside the dog, gently cradling it, feeling the warmth fade from its fur. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Some shouted at the officers, others ran to help the man. The officers stepped back, realizing the magnitude of what had happened. The man stayed still, holding his companion, his eyes calm but filled with a quiet, burning intensity that no one understood. He did not blame the neighbors. He did not yell at the officers. He simply assessed the situation, his mind moving faster than anyone could imagine. The officers tried to explain, but their words sounded hollow. They hadn't understood the loyalty, the bond, the life shared between a man and his dog. They hadn't realized that the man in front of them had been trained to face the unimaginable, to survive chaos and danger that most people could not even fathom. They didn't know that their mistake had awakened something in him, a focused resolve that was far more powerful than fear or anger. As the neighbors wept and the officers looked on in shame, the man gently laid his dog down, his hands steady, his breathing controlled. He whispered words that only he and the dog had ever shared, words of comfort and farewell. There was no dramatic outburst, no uncontrolled rage, just a quiet sorrow that ran deep, rooted in years of understanding loss and pain. He had faced death countless times, but this loss was personal in a way nothing else had been. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands, and turned to the officers. His voice was calm even, but there was an edge to it that made them take a step back. He asked them to stay put, to wait for the authorities, and then began gathering what evidence he could. He was meticulous, methodical, leaving nothing to chance. Every detail mattered. Every movement was deliberate. The neighborhood watched, some in fear, some in awe. They had seen him as quiet and kind, perhaps even ordinary, but now they glimpsed a strength they could not define. They could not know the life he had led, the skills he had honed, the missions that had tested him beyond imagination. To them, he was just a man who had lost his dog in a tragic mistake. But in reality, he was someone who had faced and survived horrors that could break any ordinary person. As the police backup arrived, the man stepped aside, allowing the investigation to begin. He answered questions with calm clarity, never raising his voice, never losing control. He described the events accurately, without exaggeration, letting the evidence speak for itself. Every gesture, every word was precise, almost surgical, reflecting a mind trained to remain composed under pressure. After the initial chaos settled, the man returned to his home. He sat in the quiet of his living room, the sunlight fading, and allowed himself a moment to grieve. He thought about the life he and his dog had shared, the walks, the small adventures, the loyalty that had never wavered. Though he had faced danger in countless forms before, this was different. This was personal. The sorrow was not for his own safety or survival, but for the companion who had trusted him completely and now was gone. But even in his grief, the man's mind was already moving. He thought about accountability, about ensuring that such a mistake would not happen to anyone else. He planned quietly and methodically the steps he would take. He knew the officers had acted recklessly, and though he would not seek vengeance in the way others might imagine, he would ensure that justice was served. His life had been built on discipline, precision, and strategy. Now those skills would be applied in this new mission. The sun set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Lights flickered on in the houses, and the streets grew quiet once more. The man stood by his window, looking out at the world as if seeing it anew. He did not know how the events of the day would unfold, but he knew that he would not let this injustice pass unnoticed. His training, his experience, and his unyielding sense of honor would guide him. Inside, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The man sat at his desk, jotting down notes, reviewing everything he had observed. He had learned long ago that even small details could be critical. A word misheard, a gesture misunderstood, a movement too quick, all could change the outcome of events. He cataloged everything, making mental notes, preparing for the steps that would follow. He was calm, methodical, unwavering. As the night deepened, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, wondering about the man and the tragedy that had unfolded. Some speculated, some whispered about his past, but no one could truly know the life that had shaped him. They saw only the quiet demeanor, the steady gaze, the sense of control that seemed almost unnatural. They did not know that behind that calm exterior was a mind trained for war, for missions that demanded courage, skill, and survival against impossible odds. He closed his notebook and looked at the spot where his dog's favorite toy had been left. It was small, simple, but it carried the memory of countless joyful moments. He touched it lightly, feeling the connection, the bond that had been severed too soon. Yet even in sorrow he felt a sense of purpose. The loss would not consume him. It would focus him. The injustice would not be ignored. It would be addressed with the precision and discipline that had always defined him. Throughout the night, the man remained alert, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. He reviewed every detail again and again, ensuring that nothing would be overlooked. He thought about how he would approach the situation, how he would gather information, and how he would make sure that accountability was achieved without compromising his principles. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. This was not just about grief. It was about justice, about honor, about ensuring that the mistakes of one day would not go unanswered. By the time the first light of dawn crept into the room, he had already planned the next steps. He knew he would face challenges, obstacles, and resistance, but he also knew that his training and experience gave him an advantage that others could not understand. He would navigate the system, expose the truth, and honor the memory of his dog with actions that spoke louder than words. The neighborhood began to stir with morning activity. Children played, neighbors chatted, and life moved on. But the man remained a figure apart, a quiet force observing, planning, and preparing. He was not ordinary, though no one would suspect it. Beneath the calm exterior was the heart of a warrior, a mind sharpened by years of service, a spirit unwavering in the face of injustice. And so the day began, not with anger or vengeance, but with purpose. The man stepped outside, breathing in the morning air, feeling the world around him with renewed awareness. He walked through the neighborhood, greeting a few neighbors, but always with an eye on the bigger picture. He knew that the events of the previous day would have consequences, and he was ready to face them with the patience, skill, and precision that had always guided him. Though the pain of loss was present, it did not define him. Instead, it fueled him, sharpened his focus, and reinforced his sense of responsibility. He was determined, disciplined, and unwavering. He would see justice done not for recognition or revenge, but because it was the right thing to do. And in that quiet determination, the neighborhood had yet to glimpse the true depth of the man they thought they knew. Behind the calm exterior lay the most elite Delta Force commander the world would never see, now channeling all his skill into a personal mission that began with grief but would end with justice. The morning after the tragedy was quiet, almost eerily so. The neighborhood seemed frozen, as if it were holding its breath. The man walked slowly through the streets, noticing the familiar places that now felt different, marked by the events of the previous day. He could still feel the warmth of his dog's fur, the softness of its eyes, and the silent understanding they had shared. The loss had left a hole in his life that no amount of calm composure could completely hide. He returned home and sat by the window, staring at the yard. Memories came back to him, not just of his dog, but of other times in his life when he had been faced with danger, loss, and responsibility. Before coming to this quiet neighborhood, he had lived a life that few could understand. His days had been filled with missions that demanded courage beyond normal limits, operations that required him to trust only his training, his instincts, and his small team of equally skilled operators. He remembered the first time he had been deployed, how young and unprepared he had felt, yet how quickly the world demanded more from him than he could imagine. The years of service had hardened him in ways the outside world could never comprehend. He had witnessed events that would haunt ordinary men for a lifetime, but he had survived, adapted, and learned. Those experiences had taught him patience, observation, and a calm under pressure that now guided every step he took. Sitting at his desk, he opened a small, worn notebook, the pages filled with notes and observations from his past life. Each word was deliberate, a record of experiences that could never be fully shared with the world. He flipped through pages, remembering the missions, the people he had trained with, and the sacrifices that had shaped him. He thought about his dog, a companion who had never judged, never questioned, and had always trusted him completely. The pain of that loss cut through even the thick layers of his military-honed composure. He knew that what had happened could not be ignored. The officers had acted recklessly, and the system often protected its own, brushing aside mistakes that affected ordinary citizens. But he was not ordinary. He had trained to see patterns, to anticipate outcomes, and to act with precision. The same discipline that had saved him and his team countless times now applied to a very different kind of mission, seeking accountability for the injustice that had taken his dog. The man spent the day reviewing the events in his mind, reconstructing every detail, every movement, every word spoken. He considered how the officers had approached him, how their misunderstanding had escalated, and how the situation could have been handled differently. Each thought was methodical, deliberate, a way to ensure that nothing would be overlooked. He was not driven by anger, but by a need for clarity and truth. Neighbors began to take notice of his presence again, some cautiously greeting him, others simply observing. They had seen his calm exterior yesterday and wondered at his quiet strength. Today they sensed something deeper, a layer of determination beneath the grief. They did not know the full story, could not imagine the life that had prepared him for situations far more dangerous than a misunderstanding on a suburban street. They saw only a man who had lost a beloved companion, but within him burned a focus that would not be distracted. Throughout the day, he collected information. He reached out to witnesses, those who had been nearby during the incident, asking simple, direct questions to understand what they had seen. He reviewed the small videos that neighbors had captured, carefully noting angles, movements, and reactions. Every piece of information was cataloged, every detail noted. He understood that the truth was built on evidence, not assumptions, and that precision would be key to achieving justice. As evening approached, he took a walk to clear his mind. The streets were quiet, children playing in the distance, neighbors calling out greetings, unaware of the storm of thought running through the man's mind. He observed everything, the positions of streetlights, the layout of houses, the patterns of movement. His military training had taught him to notice what others overlooked, and he now applied it to a new purpose, ensuring that the officers' actions could not escape scrutiny. He returned home and sat in the dim light of his living room, sketching diagrams, making notes, and planning his next steps. He thought about how to approach the authorities, how to make the evidence undeniable, and how to ensure that his actions remained within the law. He had faced dangerous missions where a single mistake could cost lives, and now he approached this with the same careful attention. Every step mattered. Every decision had consequences. That night, sleep came only briefly. His mind remained active, reviewing events, analyzing behavior, and anticipating potential obstacles. He remembered the faces of the officers, their nervousness, their haste, and the way that their misunderstanding had escalated so quickly. He did not feel hatred for them, only a clear understanding that mistakes like these had to be addressed, and that accountability was necessary not just for him, but for the safety of others in the future. In his quiet moments, he thought about his dog again. The dog had been more than a companion. It had been a source of comfort, a reminder of loyalty and trust in a world that often demanded suspicion and caution. Losing that bond was a deep wound, but it also reminded him of the values he had always carried: responsibility, courage, and the determination to do what was right. These values guided him now, shaping every choice and action he would take. He began drafting letters and statements, outlining what had happened, detailing the evidence, and making clear the consequences of negligence. He wrote carefully, each word chosen to convey truth and clarity, to ensure that there could be no misinterpretation. He understood that power often lay in calm, precise communication, and he applied the same discipline he had used in the field to craft documents that would speak volumes without exaggeration. Throughout the week, he continued to observe the neighborhood, quietly taking note of patterns and behaviors. He spoke with those who had witnessed the incident, offering reassurance and gathering perspective. He remained calm, approachable, and methodical. The neighbors noticed his quiet presence, sensing a strength and resolve that was unusual but admirable. They could not know the depth of his past, the life that had honed his instincts, or the precision with which he now approached every step. The officers involved began their own investigation, but the man had already anticipated the common tactics of evasion and deflection. He prepared for these contingencies, collecting additional evidence, ensuring that the truth would be undeniable. His planning was thorough, deliberate, and methodical. He approached the situation like he had approached missions in the past, with clarity, focus, and an unwavering commitment to the objective. Evenings were the most difficult. He would sit quietly, remembering the dog, feeling the grief, but never allowing it to cloud his judgment. He understood that loss was part of life, and that true strength lay in channeling pain into action rather than letting it consume him. His focus on justice became a form of tribute, a way to honor the loyalty and trust that had been given to him and lost too soon. The neighbors began to notice subtle changes. The man who had always been quiet and reserved now exuded a different kind of presence, focused, intentional, and unwavering. People whispered, speculated, and watched with curiosity, sensing that there was more beneath the surface. They could not know that behind his calm exterior was someone who had faced unimaginable danger and emerged alive, someone whose mind was trained to plan, anticipate, and act with precision. As the week progressed, he reached out to journalists discreetly, providing factual accounts, carefully curated evidence, and witness statements. He did not seek attention for himself, only for the truth to be recognized. His approach was meticulous, avoiding sensationalism, focusing on clarity and accuracy. He understood that real impact came from undeniable truth, not dramatics. He also took time to reflect on the life he had left behind. Memories of camaraderie, trust, and the bonds formed during years of service came to mind. He realized that the skills he had learned, the discipline, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, were now his tools for navigating a civilian system that often overlooked accountability. His past life had prepared him in ways that no ordinary preparation could, giving him an edge that was invisible but powerful. By the end of the week, the first formal steps toward accountability had begun. Authorities had received his statements, journalists had been provided with verified facts, and the evidence he had collected was being reviewed. He remained patient, knowing that processes could take time, but confident that the truth was solid. His approach was not aggressive but methodical, precise and undeniable. Throughout this time, he continued to live quietly in the neighborhood, greeting neighbors, maintaining routines, and showing calm composure. There was no outward display of anger or confrontation, only a steady, disciplined presence that reflected both grief and determination. He walked through the streets with purpose, observed the world with clarity, and prepared for the next steps in his mission of justice. He knew the officers were aware of his persistence, but did not understand the depth of his resolve or the precision of his planning. They saw only a quiet man seeking answers, unaware of the life that had forged his skills, the discipline that guided his actions, and the unwavering determination to ensure that mistakes would not go unaddressed. The neighborhood slowly began to return to normal routines, yet the memory of the incident lingered. The man's quiet presence remained a reminder that events, even in a seemingly peaceful suburb, could have lasting consequences. People watched him, curious and respectful, sensing the integrity and focus that defined him, and through it all, he never wavered. The grief for his dog remained a quiet ache, but it was joined by a sense of purpose and clarity. He had channeled his loss into action, transforming sorrow into a mission to ensure that justice was served, that accountability was maintained, and that truth prevailed. Every decision, every action, every plan was guided by the discipline and experience of a life few could understand. A life now focused on ensuring that a tragedy would not be forgotten or repeated. The following days brought a mix of quiet tension and careful observation. The man continued his routine, walking the streets, visiting the small park where he and his dog had spent many afternoons, and keeping track of the subtle movements of the neighborhood. Each step, each glance, each interaction was measured and deliberate. He remained calm, his grief held in check, and his mind was always assessing the environment, cataloging every detail, and preparing for the actions he knew would follow. He knew the officers would attempt to defend themselves, perhaps deflect responsibility or minimize the mistake. But he also knew the truth was clear, and with careful strategy it could not be ignored. He began reaching out to witnesses again, this time more deliberately, recording their statements with precision. He asked questions that allowed the witnesses to recount events naturally, without suggestion or bias, ensuring their accounts would be credible and strong. In quiet moments, he reflected on his own life, the lessons that had been ingrained in him through years of service in highly secretive missions. Every mission had demanded attention to detail, patience, and anticipation of variables that most people could not even imagine. He understood that the same principles applied now, only the stakes were different. This was not a battlefield filled with enemy combatants, but it required the same discipline, careful planning, and strategic thinking to achieve a successful outcome. He also reached out to legal advisors, those he trusted to understand the nuances of law and procedure. He did not rush, did not make demands, but ensured that every step he took was informed, precise, and defensible. His approach was methodical, almost surgical, reflecting the same mindset that had guided him through countless dangerous operations. He was patient, knowing that rushing or acting impulsively could compromise the objective. Throughout the neighborhood, whispers began to circulate. Some neighbors noticed his visits to the park, his careful observation of the streets, and the quiet intensity in his eyes. They did not know the full story, could not understand the depth of his experience, but they sensed that he was different. His calm demeanor, coupled with a resolute focus, made people take notice even if they could not articulate why. As he continued gathering evidence, he began reviewing footage captured by home security cameras and phones from nearby neighbors. He analyzed every frame, noting body language, positioning, and timing. Even small details, the tilt of a head, the hesitation in a movement, the angle of a gun, were recorded and catalogued. His experience in high-stakes missions had taught him to observe and understand these nuances, and he applied it now with the same precision. He also thought about the dog, the small creature whose loyalty and companionship had been unmatched. The grief remained, but it had become a guiding force, reminding him of what mattered. This was not only about justice for himself, but for every life that could be impacted by careless actions. He understood that the officer's mistake had consequences far beyond the immediate incident, and that accountability was essential to prevent future tragedies. He began to draft statements, detailing his findings with clarity and accuracy. Each paragraph, each sentence was carefully considered. He avoided exaggeration or emotion-driven language, instead relying on facts, evidence, and clear reasoning. He knew that the strength of his case would not come from anger or grief, but from a methodical presentation of the truth. His words were precise, measured, and powerful in their simplicity. While compiling the evidence, he noticed subtle reactions from the officers involved. They were cautious, aware that he was not a man to be underestimated. But they could not know the full extent of his training, the depth of his experience, or the meticulousness with which he approached every step. They saw only a calm man seeking answers, unaware that they were facing someone whose skills had been honed in the most extreme conditions imaginable. Neighbors continued to interact with him, some offering small gestures of sympathy, others curious about his calm determination. He engaged politely, acknowledging their concern without revealing too much. His demeanor remained composed, almost serene, even as his mind worked tirelessly. The contrast between his outward calm and the intense focus within was striking, though few could perceive it. He also spent time thinking strategically about the larger system. He understood the bureaucratic challenges, the tendencies of institutions to protect their own, and the common ways in which accountability could be delayed or deflected. With this understanding, he crafted a plan that anticipated obstacles, addressed potential gaps, and ensured that the truth could not be denied. Each action was carefully mapped, each step reinforcing the integrity of his mission. At night, he revisited memories from his past life, reflecting on the missions, the camaraderie, and the challenges he had faced. These recollections were not mere nostalgia. They were a source of insight and strength. They reminded him that he had survived impossible odds before, and that the discipline, patience, and focus he had learned were tools he could use now. His grief for the dog was intertwined with a renewed sense of purpose, driving him forward with clarity and resolve. He maintained a journal, documenting each observation, interaction, and piece of evidence. This record was meticulous, precise, and organized, reflecting a mind trained to leave nothing to chance. Each entry was a step toward accountability, a means of ensuring that the incident would be thoroughly examined and that justice could be pursued without ambiguity. As the days passed, he began to coordinate discreetly with journalists, lawyers, and community members who could help ensure the story was heard. He did not seek personal recognition, only the acknowledgement of facts in the pursuit of fairness. His approach was careful, deliberate, and ethical, reflecting his understanding of both legal and social dynamics. He knew that truth, presented clearly and backed by evidence, had power far greater than any display of anger or dramatics. In his interactions with the neighborhood, he continued to demonstrate composure and empathy. He listened to concerns, offered calm reassurances, and maintained his routine. This balance of human warmth and disciplined focus made him both approachable and formidable. People respected him, even if they did not fully understand the depth of his experience or the precision with which he approached his mission. He began to anticipate the officers' responses, considering how they might try to justify their actions or downplay the incident. He prepared counterpoints, evidence, and documentation to address each potential argument. His strategy was proactive, not reactive, reflecting a mindset honed through years of anticipating and neutralizing threats before they could become dangerous. Even in quiet moments, he continued to reflect on the dog, the loss, and the lessons it had taught him. He thought about loyalty, trust, and the unspoken bond between a man and his companion. This reflection reinforced his commitment to his mission, reminding him that justice was not just about righting a wrong, but about honoring those who had been lost and ensuring that similar mistakes did not happen again. As the week came to a close, he had built a comprehensive, well-documented case. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every observation was carefully organized and verified. He was ready to move forward, confident that his approach would withstand scrutiny and achieve the desired outcome. The process had been deliberate, patient, and strategic, reflecting the depth of his training and the clarity of his purpose. Neighbors continued to watch, some with curiosity, some with quiet admiration. They could sense that he was different, but they could not fully understand why. He moved through the neighborhood with a quiet confidence, engaging with the world without revealing the extraordinary life that had prepared him for this moment. To them he was calm, resolute, and deeply principled. To the man himself he was focused, methodical, and ready to ensure that justice was served. As evening fell, he sat in his living room, reviewing his notes, confirming details, and preparing for the next steps. The grief for his dog remained, a quiet ache, but it had become a source of strength, guiding his actions and sharpening his focus. He knew that the pursuit of justice required patience, precision, and unwavering commitment, and he was determined to uphold these principles. Through careful observation, meticulous planning, and ethical action, he had transformed personal loss into a mission that carried significance beyond himself. He was not motivated by anger or revenge, but by a disciplined sense of responsibility, a commitment to truth, and a desire to prevent similar mistakes in the future. His past had shaped him, his experience had prepared him, and his resolve was unshakable. And so, as the neighborhood settled into the quiet of night, he continued his work. Every detail, every action, every thought was part of a careful strategy, a deliberate pursuit of accountability. He had turned grief into purpose, loss into clarity, and tragedy into a mission that would ultimately ensure that the truth could not be ignored, that justice could be pursued, and that the memory of his loyal companion would be honored through action and integrity. The man spent the following days quietly orchestrating his plan. Each morning he walked through the neighborhood, observing the world with a keen eye. He noticed small details that others overlooked: the angle of streetlights, the way shadows fell on the pavement, the subtle interactions between neighbors. Every observation mattered. Though he moved among ordinary people, he saw the patterns, the routines, and the inconsistencies that could help him build a clear understanding of what had happened and how it might be addressed. He continued gathering information meticulously. Each witness he spoke with was approached with calm, clear communication. He asked precise questions, encouraging them to describe events in their own words. He paid attention to body language, tone, and hesitation, knowing that even small clues could reveal the truth. His approach was methodical, reflective of the skills he had honed in years of service, where careful observation and analysis had been the difference between success and failure. As he collected evidence, he began formulating a plan to ensure accountability. He knew that presenting facts alone was not enough. The story had to be undeniable. He compiled video footage, photographs, and detailed written accounts, organizing everything logically and systematically. His documentation was thorough, leaving no detail unchecked, no question unanswered. The officer's mistakes were clear, and he was determined that the truth could not be dismissed. He reached out to legal advisors he trusted, sharing his findings and seeking guidance on how to proceed within the law. He was patient, deliberate, and careful to maintain transparency and accuracy. The process required time and thought, and he applied the same strategic thinking that had guided him in high-pressure situations. His focus was unwavering, and his purpose was clear: to ensure that those responsible for the dog's death faced the consequences of their actions. Throughout the neighborhood, people began to notice a subtle shift in his demeanor. He was still polite, calm, and approachable, but there was a quiet intensity in his movements and interactions. Neighbors sensed that he was not ordinary, though they could not pinpoint why. His presence commanded respect, and his methodical approach inspired confidence. People began to take note of his commitment to fairness and truth, even without understanding the depth of his past. He also reflected privately on the loss of his dog, allowing himself brief moments of grief. He remembered the walks, the playful moments in the park, and the loyalty that had defined their relationship. These memories fueled his determination. The grief was not a distraction but a motivating force guiding him toward his goal. He understood that channeling emotion into action was a powerful tool, and he used it with precision and care. As the week progressed, he began to communicate discreetly with journalists and community members who could help ensure the story reached the right people. He provided them with carefully verified evidence, detailed accounts, and witness statements. He avoided sensationalism, focusing on clarity, accuracy, and the undeniable facts of the incident. His methodical approach made the case stronger, and the story began to gain attention in a way that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, the officers involved grew increasingly aware that their actions were under scrutiny. They had underestimated the man's resolve, failing to recognize the depth of his experience and the precision with which he approached every detail. They were cautious in their movements, hesitant in their statements, and aware that their negligence was being documented comprehensively. Yet they could not anticipate the full extent of his planning, the meticulousness with which he had prepared for every possible response. He also spent time analyzing potential outcomes, considering how the officers, the department, and the public might respond. He anticipated obstacles and prepared contingencies, ensuring that the truth would be communicated effectively, fairly, and with integrity. Each decision was deliberate, each step strategically planned. His experience in high-stakes situations had taught him that preparation and foresight were essential, and he applied these lessons to this very different but equally important mission. Evenings were spent reviewing the collected material, refining statements and organizing documentation. He ensured that every witness statement was clear, every video clip correctly labeled, and every piece of evidence supported the narrative of what had occurred. This meticulous approach created a compelling and irrefutable case. His attention to detail reflected the discipline and training that had been the foundation of his professional life, now applied to seeking justice in his civilian world. Throughout the process, he maintained a balance between public engagement and private reflection. He spoke with neighbors, offered reassurance, and demonstrated empathy and integrity. His interactions were calm, measured, and grounded, reinforcing the sense that he was a person of principle. People noticed his dedication to fairness and truth, and while they could not understand the full extent of his past, they respected his focus and determination. He also took time to consider the emotional and social implications of the incident. He thought about the message it would send to the community, the importance of accountability, and the need to prevent similar mistakes in the future. His approach was holistic, addressing not just the immediate consequences but the broader impact on the neighborhood and society. This perspective reflected the strategic thinking he had developed over years of service, where understanding the bigger picture was critical to achieving long-term success. As the case gained attention, he continued to engage with legal and community resources, ensuring that each step was transparent and defensible. He was careful to follow procedures, document actions, and maintain credibility. His discipline and methodical approach ensured that the narrative remained clear, accurate, and compelling. He understood that accountability required both evidence and strategy, and he applied both with skill and precision. In private moments, he revisited memories of his dog, reflecting on the bond that had been lost and the loyalty that had been unwavering. These reflections were not just about grief. They were a reminder of the values he carried: responsibility, integrity, and the pursuit of justice. They fueled his actions, guiding him toward the goal of ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. His personal loss became a driving force, shaping his mission and giving it clarity and purpose. As the days turned into weeks, the man's efforts began to yield results. Journalists reported on the incident with factual accuracy, legal advisors provided guidance and support, and community members became aware of the situation. The officers involved faced scrutiny and pressure, and the process of accountability was set in motion. The man's careful planning, meticulous evidence gathering, and disciplined approach had created a situation in which the truth could not be ignored. Throughout this process, he maintained his composure, his empathy, and his focus. He continued to engage with the neighborhood, offering calm presence and reassurance while simultaneously working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that justice was achieved. His actions were deliberate, strategic, and ethical, reflecting the principles that had guided him throughout his life. He demonstrated that strength, discipline, and integrity could achieve meaningful outcomes even in the face of tragedy. At night, he would sit quietly reviewing notes, reflecting on the day's progress and planning next steps. His grief remained, but it had become a source of strength rather than a distraction. He understood that true resilience involved channeling pain into purposeful action, and he applied this lesson with precision. Every decision, every movement, and every word was guided by the principles he had cultivated over a lifetime of service and experience. Neighbors began to recognize the man's quiet determination and methodical approach. They observed his commitment to fairness, the careful attention to detail, and the integrity with which he pursued his mission. While they could not fully comprehend his past or the depth of his skills, they saw the impact of his actions and respected the strength and resolve he displayed. His presence became a symbol of calm authority and unwavering commitment to truth. By the end of the fourth part of his journey, the foundation for accountability was firmly established. Evidence was organized, witnesses had been heard, and legal processes were underway. The officers involved were under scrutiny, and the narrative of what had occurred was clear and compelling. The man's methodical, strategic, and disciplined approach had created a path for justice that could not be easily obstructed or ignored. Throughout this time, he continued to honor the memory of his dog through reflection, quiet rituals, and careful planning. His personal loss remained a guiding force, reminding him of the values that had always defined him: loyalty, integrity, discipline, and responsibility. These principles guided every action, ensuring that his pursuit of accountability was not only effective but also principled and ethical. In the end, the man's actions demonstrated the power of focus, discipline, and integrity in achieving meaningful outcomes. He transformed personal grief into purposeful action, loss into clarity, and tragedy into a mission that upheld truth and accountability. His story, unfolding quietly yet powerfully in a suburban neighborhood, illustrated that courage, strategy, and ethical resolve could create change, even when the world seemed ordinary and ordinary people were unaware of the extraordinary strength that lay beneath the surface. The following days were a turning point. The man had gathered all the evidence, reviewed witness statements, and ensured that every detail was accounted for. His careful planning had created a solid foundation, and now it was time to see the results of his disciplined approach. Yet he did not rush. He understood that patience was essential, that outcomes depended on careful timing and measured action. The lessons from his past missions, where a single mistake could have dire consequences, guided him now as much as ever. He continued to move quietly through the neighborhood, maintaining his routine while observing any changes. People were becoming more aware of his presence, noticing the calm intensity with which he navigated each day. They could sense that something important was unfolding, though they could not see the careful orchestration behind his actions. His calm demeanor was a shield and a signal of control, demonstrating strength without aggression. Legal procedures began to take shape. Lawyers he trusted advised him, outlining the steps for ensuring the officers faced proper accountability. He reviewed each recommendation, cross-checked every piece of evidence, and confirmed that nothing could undermine the process. His experience in planning operations that required meticulous attention to detail was invaluable now, allowing him to anticipate obstacles and ensure that every action moved the mission forward. At the same time, he engaged selectively with journalists. The information he shared was precise, factual, and backed by evidence. He avoided drama and sensationalism, instead, letting the facts speak for themselves. This approach created credibility and trust, ensuring that when the story reached the public, it would be understood clearly and respected. His calm, deliberate strategy highlighted the power of preparation and accuracy over impulsive action. Behind the scenes, he continued to review all the materials once more. Video footage, photographs, witness statements, and his own observations were organized in a way that left nothing to chance. Every potential counter-argument was considered, and strategies were developed to address them. He was thorough, knowing that any oversight could weaken the truth. This careful attention mirrored the precision and focus that had defined his life before the neighborhood, and it now applied perfectly to this personal mission. The officers involved were increasingly aware that their actions were under scrutiny. Their initial defensiveness had begun to waver as they realized the depth of preparation behind the man's case. They could sense that he was not just another citizen angry at an error, but someone who approached challenges methodically, strategically, and with unwavering discipline. They did not know the full extent of his past, the skills honed through years of elite service, and the meticulous planning that now guided every move. The man also took time to reflect privately on the bond with his dog. He remembered the walks, the playful moments, and the unspoken understanding that had defined their relationship. These memories were both comforting and motivating, reminding him why justice was important and why accountability could not be ignored. The grief he felt had transformed into purpose, guiding every decision and action he took. Throughout this period, he continued to maintain his presence in the neighborhood. He greeted neighbors, observed the streets, and engaged in ordinary activities while quietly ensuring that every piece of evidence was documented and every interaction accounted for. His calm demeanor reassured the community, and the quiet authority he exuded created respect and attention without fear. People could sense that he was principled, capable, and determined, even if they did not know the extraordinary experiences that had shaped him. He also prepared for the potential legal and procedural challenges that could arise. Anticipating attempts to delay or deflect accountability, he ensured that every step he took was legally sound, well documented, and supported by facts. His methodical approach left little room for evasion. This careful planning, combined with his strategic thinking, made him a formidable force in ensuring that the truth could not be ignored. Evenings were devoted to reflection and strategy. He reviewed the day's observations, refined statements, and considered next steps. His grief remained a quiet presence, a reminder of what had been lost, but it had become a source of clarity and motivation. The loss of his dog was no longer just pain. It was a call to action, shaping his approach and reinforcing the need for justice. As attention to the incident grew, both within the community and in broader circles, he remained focused on the mission. He avoided distractions, continued to gather information, and maintained a disciplined routine. His efforts were not for personal recognition but for accountability, truth, and ensuring that such a mistake could not be overlooked. He understood that true influence came from clear, principled action rather than emotion or aggression. Through careful coordination with journalists and legal advisors, the man ensured that every fact was presented accurately. Witness accounts were corroborated, video evidence was clearly annotated, and the timeline of events was laid out logically. His approach made it increasingly difficult for the officers or any institution to dismiss the truth. The strategy of methodical preparation, precision, and ethical conduct was proving effective, demonstrating that deliberate action could achieve meaningful outcomes. He also took time to anticipate public perception and community response. He considered how neighbors might interpret events, how officials might react, and how to communicate facts without distortion. His training in strategic thinking allowed him to plan for multiple outcomes simultaneously, ensuring that truth and justice were at the forefront of every interaction and decision. In private moments, he reflected on the lessons of his past life, connecting them with the present mission. Patience, discipline, observation, and integrity were not just military tools. They were universal principles that guided effective action. He realized that his experience had prepared him to navigate this situation with clarity, calm, and authority. The personal loss of his dog became intertwined with these principles, giving him purpose and resolve. As days turned into weeks, legal and community efforts began to solidify. Statements were reviewed, documents submitted, and evidence presented in ways that could not be ignored. The officers faced increasing accountability, and the narrative of the incident became increasingly clear. The man's careful, strategic, and disciplined approach had created an undeniable record that would ensure justice for the loss he had suffered. Neighbors continued to notice his calm determination and unwavering focus. While few could understand the full depth of his experiences, they respected his presence and integrity. He became a symbol of quiet strength, demonstrating that thoughtful, ethical action could create change even in complex situations. His conduct highlighted the importance of discipline, observation, and methodical planning in achieving meaningful outcomes. Throughout the final phase of this mission, he maintained his focus on the larger purpose. Every interaction, observation, and decision was guided by the goal of accountability and truth. His personal loss, grief, and reflection provided clarity, while his experience and training provided the skills necessary to navigate a challenging and potentially resistant system. Eventually, the case reached a point where accountability could no longer be delayed. The officers were confronted with the evidence, witness statements were recognized, and the process for resolution was underway. The man's strategic planning, methodical preparation, and ethical approach ensured that justice would be served. His calm, disciplined, and purposeful actions had created a situation where the truth was undeniable. In the quiet moments after the resolution began to take shape, he reflected on the journey. The grief for his dog was still present, but it had transformed into a sense of purpose fulfilled. The